Opening day is just around the corner, and that means baseball time in Oxford, Mississippi. Helping us talk and break down all things Ole Miss Rebels on the Diamond. Good friend of the show, good friend of mine, Brad Logan. He's a contributor inside the Rebels on 24/7 Sports, the host of the Believe in Ole Miss podcast, and the co-host of Red and Blue Crew podcast as well. Brad, what's going on, my friend? Appreciate you taking the time, and really excited to talk some Ole Miss Rebels baseball heading into a really important 2025 season.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Chris. Thanks for having me on, and congratulations, first of all, on all your success. You look at what Ole Miss has coming in, and you'll see the Rebels front and center when you cover the Classic over in Texas. And it's a really good, group. Arizona, Texas, and Clemson, along with Ole Miss. Those three teams were in the NCAA tournament last year. Ole Miss will be tested early, and a lot to really look at for this year, because you look at what Ole Miss did last year, and it just was not where it needed to be. We had a chance to visit with Mike Bianco a couple of weeks ago, and look, he understands the significance of this season. He understands that Ole Miss cannot have a season that it had the last 2 years. Records of 52 and 58 since winning the national championship, but the big number, Chris, is 17 and 43 in the SEC, and that is not Ole Miss baseball under Mike Bianco, and he knows that. So really excited to see what we see to open the season, and nobody knows the significance of this season any more than Mike Bianco does.
And Brad, you really took me to my first point I wanted to get into, which again, that number that stands out, that 17 and 43 in SEC play since winning the national championship in June of 2022, which again, who would have ever thought, right? When you're hoisting the trophy and think about where you are 2.5 or 3 some years later, if you will. You talked about the pressure, though. Obviously, Ole Miss, very proud baseball program. There's a lot of history there. I mean, would you call this? Is it too much to call this a make or break season for Mike Bianco's job, or is it that type of pressure and expectations on the season? Again, because you look at the body of work. I mean, this dude's been one of the best coaches in the SEC for essentially 2 decades. But now we've reached a point where, with NIL and there's high pressure and high expectations. And you think about even the 2022 season, Brad. I mean, it was a team that had to be essentially the last team in the field and then went on an unprecedented run to win the College World Series. But what is the pressure like on Bianco? And again, would you call this season a make or break for his future there?
Yeah, I'm not one that thinks that if you win the national championship, you get a lifetime pass to be at the school that you wanted at. But I'm also not one to think that this is a make or break season for Mike Bianco. I truly believe that so much sweat equity was gained with this Ole Miss program, not only what Mike has done the last 25 years, but culminating all of that with a national championship, I think gives you quite a bit of leeway. So I wouldn't go so far as to say this is a make or break year. I do think for a lot of ways that for the Ole Miss fans, they definitely would like to see marked improvement. And I think that one thing that Mike did this year, and I think he understands the significance of this year. Once again, we talked to him a couple of weeks ago. He understands the last 2 years, just not satisfactory when you talk about Ole Miss baseball. So much so that he went and hired Joel Mangrum out of the professional ranks, out of Major League Baseball. He will be the single pitching coach. And we asked Mike, would he actually be, quote unquote, on the microphone calling the pitches with the walkie-talkie? And he grinned and said, absolutely. And we'll get into the pitchers in just a moment. I think it's a really nice crop of pitchers this year. Once again, I'm really excited to see who Ole Miss starts. We have a projection of who we believe that will be the starting 3. But I'm really excited to see who goes to the mound for Ole Miss. I think just understanding you go to the portal if you're Mike Bianco. You got a couple of players to assist in the outfield. You go and you hire Joel Mangrum, a pitching coach. You do things, Chris, that Mike hasn't done over the last couple of years, and that's kind of changed some things around, adapting a little bit to the new world of NIL, understanding the new world of college baseball. I don't know that it's quite the significance as college football, but there is a bit of a shift in college baseball. We're seeing that across the SEC. So many teams ranked in the top 25. Ole Miss was not one of those teams, and I think that really hit home with a lot of Ole Miss fans. Ole Miss has always been a program that's ranked in that top 25. We saw them drop out last year, not in the preseason polls amongst, I think, almost over half the SEC teams are ranked this year in the preseason poll. So not so far as to say that this is a make or break year, but I do think it is a year of significance for Mike Bianco and this Ole Miss baseball team.
Brad, before we dive into this roster and this 2025 group, I do want to ask you, kind of based off some conversations I had with some Ole Miss fans, actually over the football season at a tailgate when I came down there to Oxford for that Ole Miss Georgia game. But we were talking baseball, obviously, and there was some concern amongst some of the folks I was with about maybe the NIL situation with baseball in regards to, you see the Andrew Fishers and the Liam Doyles. They both go to Tennessee. I know, obviously, Chris Beard's asking for a lot, well-deserved, and they're having a good season on the hardwood. And we all know what Lane Kiffin and company have done in the transfer portal, the talent they've signed. You're someone, again, you're as close to this thing as anybody. You're a fan of the Rebels. You're an analyst of the Rebels. Is there any concern in your part that maybe baseball is kind of falling by the wayside while, supplementing the other sports? Or is that something you think that's just kind of a sort of a made-up narrative amongst fans to maybe justify why some of the portal pieces went the way they did?
Well, Ole Miss is no different than other programs throughout the SEC. That the linchpin of the athletic department is football, and that's absolutely the case with Ole Miss. Now, baseball is not the drain on the athletic budget like it is in a lot of other programs. A lot of your Olympic sports, well, quite frankly, all of them are supplemented by the football program. I will say this, Chris, the conversations I've had with the administrators of the Grove Collective and other administrators at the university, I have not gotten the feedback that Ole Miss is struggling financially in regards to the NIL space. In fact, I've been told that things are much better than they initially thought. Chris, the roster that Ole Miss put out on the field in football, as we saw at the Senior Bowl, as we've seen at the East-West Shrine game, so many players specifically on the defensive side of the ball for Ole Miss are going into the NFL. It was a very expensive roster for Ole Miss, and the NFL and the NIL collective. In this case, Ole Miss is the Grove Collective, with a large part of that success. Many thought, with as expensive as that roster was, that Ole Miss would take a step back in its collective. I've been told that's not necessarily the case, and I've also been told that other sports throughout the conference, and specifically with Ole Miss, they've done very well in the NIL space. And I did not get anything in conversations with Mike Bianco that has been a challenge. So I think Ole Miss is in a really good spot, not only in the SEC but in the country when it talks about the NIL space. And I think Ole Miss, and specifically head coach Mike Bianco, has done a really good job navigating those waters.
So, Brad, as we dive into this 2025 Rebel squad, we were talking about, again, the fact that Mike Bianco's got a pitching coach now, Joel Mangrum, first time in his legendary tenure there. Let's talk the pitchers first. And the big piece here, Brad, Hunter Elliott is back from injury. It feels like it's been forever since we've seen this kid toe the rubber. You think back to what he did, though, as a freshman, obviously a major part of that 2022 national championship run. Riley Maddox, you expect him, the senior, to be your Friday night guy. Again, Elliott on the weekend, Mason Nichols in the number 3 spot. Cade Townsend, I know the freshman, is a guy that the Rebels are really high on, and then Connor Spencer at the back end of the bullpen. All of that to say, Brad, tell us more about the Ole Miss pitching staff. And it sounds like, again, especially Hunter Elliott is the key. If he can come back and, even be close to just 100% of what he was, he can be one of the best pitchers in the entire country. So thoughts on the Ole Miss Rebels pitching staff and what you're expecting from that group this season?
Well, the good news when you talk about Hunter Elliott, Chris, is he was a large component of that national championship back in 2022. Now, he had the surgery, so the questions are, is he going to be a huge component of this Ole Miss pitching staff? Everything that we've learned is he will, and his recovery has gone really well. So Ole Miss will be leaning upon him to be the left-handed senior, to be the Friday night starter, we think. The other projections that we believe, Riley Maddox to get the starting nod possibly on Saturday, and the Sunday starter to be Mason Nichols. Those are two names that have been inside the program for quite a while, and expect them to be huge components of the Ole Miss pitching staff. A couple of names, too, Braden Jones, right-handed pitcher, and the left-handed pitcher, Gunnar Dennis. Those are two names that could be a huge part of this Ole Miss pitching staff. The name you probably won't hear is starting Ole Miss quarterback Austin Simmons. I know you and your listeners and viewers know that Austin Simmons was someone that threw around 90 miles an hour from the left-hand side. That's something you can't teach. So, but he is choosing to focus strictly on football. Mike Bianco has said that he wishes Austin nothing but the best, but you have to think he definitely will miss that arm. You talk about middle relief. I think there are a number of names you can throw out, but the name that I believe that Ole Miss will have as its closer will be right-hand pitcher Connor Spencer. He did a great job last year. I think he had 7 saves. Obviously, the fastball is the pitch he's going to be going to. So Ole Miss be kind of feeling its way out in the Shriners Classic, but I think SEC play, if it started today, those are the three that I believe will be the starters for the Rebels.
Brad, as we turn our attention to the lineup 1 through 9, obviously I mentioned Andrew Fisher, and certainly his loss will be felt. But Ole Miss did some damage itself in the transfer portal. Brand new outfield, left, center, and right. You've got Mormon coming in from Illinois. You've got Humphrey from Louisville, and you've got Sanford from New Orleans. And those guys hit 19, 10, and 15 home runs, respectively, at each of those previous stops. So they'll be expected to make big-time waves and big-time contributions. Judd Uttermark, the veteran, he's back at first base. Will Furness at DH expected to play a big role. So you've got some experience back, but obviously those portal guys in the outfield, they're going to play a big role as well. I know catching woes, there was a little bit of a problem at catcher spot last year. What are you expecting from this group 1 through 9, and do you expect a potent offense in Oxford this season?
Yeah, from what we're being told is Will Furness had a really good fall camp. So there is a chance that Furness could play first, which could mean Udemark could play third, but I think in this case, from what we saw, there's also a chance Luke Chain could be the starting third base. Had a really good fall camp. So you've got a good problem, if you will. Udemark could be the designated hitter if Furness could play first. So if you platoon those guys, that could be an opportunity. Campbell Smithwick was on a lot of preseason watch lists. And, we talked with Mike Bianco about Smithwick, and he started as a true freshman, came in very highly decorated, and really just struggled, Chris, to be honest with you. Just struggled both at the plate and behind the plate. And Ole Miss had a couple of catchers that entered the portal that they kind of rotated in and out. So it's a bit of a question mark. I do expect Smithwick to get the start. He did actually get much better at the plate in some pinch hit situations, and also he designated hit a couple of places as well. So that could be something to watch. Luke Hill, I expect him to play second base, and then Braden Randall to play shortstop. And the middle infield had some challenges, frankly, last year, Chris. And I think, one thing, they kind of kicked it around a little bit in fall ball, but I do think their best answers will be Luke Hill at second and then Braden Randall at short. The third baseman, we talked about Luke Ching. I think he really, from everything that we heard, just quite frankly, just played really well there. And you made mention of Udemark at first, but I really think Ching's going to play third base. The outfield is really interesting because this will be the first time in the history of Mike Bianco's career that Ole Miss will have 3 transfers that start in the outfield. 3 really good transfers. And you made mention Ryan Mormon coming in, the transfer out of Illinois, Mitchell Sanford, and then Isaac Humphrey. Those guys are really good. And I think that just goes to show you that Mike Bianco is able to adapt. And I think that's a word that has not been synonymous with Mike Bianco during his tenure at Ole Miss, is adapting with the times. And I think Mike would even tell you that. Kind of set in his ways, the traditional ways of recruiting, the assistant coaching staff that he has. But I do think I can't go back, saying this enough, with Joel Mangrum, the pitching coach, going out and kind of giving the reins over to Mangrum with all the pitchers and everything that we've heard, all the pitchers we've talked with, including Hunter Elliott, talking about how he's transitioned and learned so much from Mangrum. This allows Bianco to focus on those outfielders, and most importantly, Chris, a former college catcher at LSU, focusing on the catching position. He caught for Ben McDonald, the All-American at LSU, who, of course, now is a part of the Orioles radio network, was a great pitcher in the Orioles organization. So Bianco now kind of going back to his roots, so to speak, I think focusing in on catcher. I'm really excited to see how Ole Miss is going to be in the field, out in the outfield, with Mormon, Sanford, and Humphrey. And then we'll see what happens with some more of the transfers, maybe some more freshmen that get to play some in the Shriners Classic. But those are absolutely the positions I'll be looking for when Ole Miss opens the season.
Yeah, Brad, to your point, veteran sticks in the transfer portal seem to always play out pretty well for the most part. 2 of those guys, we mentioned the outfield, redshirt seniors, and the other is a senior. So a lot of at-bats under their belt certainly should boost the Ole Miss lineup this season. Brad, again, you know this program, this team better than anybody. Give us one pitcher and one hitter that, to folks outside of Oxford's an unknown, that you think it'll become a household name by season's end.
Well, Will Furness is someone that everybody probably knows, but I don't know that everybody knows him, specifically his background with his dad at LSU, Eddie Furness. And so his dad was known for, and you'll have to forgive me, I want to say 1993 when LSU won the national championship and Eddie Furness hit the big home run. Everyone's kind of looking for Will Furness to have that breakout moment. Now, he's had some big hits. He's had a couple of home runs, but I think They're wanting to see a little more contact, but I think this is a year that Will Furness breaks out for Ole Miss. Mason Nichols is someone that he may not be the Sunday starter, but he's given some really good minutes or really good pitches in a reliever's role in the middle innings. So that's someone that I'll be watching to see if maybe Mason Nichols takes a step forward. Before we get out of here, I think it's important to note the schedule for the SEC, Chris, as I know you looked at teams across the SEC. I think 9 or 10 of the 16 teams are ranked. I think if there are good news, I think for Ole Miss is you avoid number 1 Texas A&M on the schedule right now. These are the preseason polls. You avoid number 3 LSU. You avoid number 8 Georgia, and you avoid number 19 Texas. Now, the not so good news, you've got number 5 Arkansas, number 10 Florida, number 4 Tennessee, number 16 Vandy, and number 18 Mississippi State. I do think, as the polls came out, and I think only maybe South Carolina or Georgia, South Carolina, or one team is below Ole Miss. The good news is you do avoid some of those highly ranked teams. So I think the SEC, it could have been a whole lot worse. It could have been an SEC schedule just full of top 10 ranked teams. But the good news for Ole Miss is you go on the road to Missouri, Kentucky, Carolina, Oklahoma. And the only team you go on the road to face, Chris, right now is a ranked Mississippi State team. So the SEC schedule makers were not bad to Ole Miss. And so the Rebels, if they're going to make hay, they've got an opportunity to do so against some teams that are not as ranked as high. And you allow other teams to kind of beat up on everybody else. I think there's a good opportunity for Ole Miss to make some hay this year and avoid some of the stiffer competition, if you will.
Yeah, to your point, Brad, there's no such thing as an easy schedule when it comes to an SEC baseball season, but there are some more manageable than others. To your point, I mean, listen, ask Texas A&M or some others. Those schedules are absolute gauntlets. So to your point, I think Ole Miss did come out favorable there. The last few years, it's safe to say, Brad, it's fallen short of expectation and what Ole Miss baseball is supposed to be. If the Rebels are going to bounce back, let's say get back to postseason play and have more of a season in Oxford that feels like a vintage Mike Bianco Ole Miss baseball season. In your mind, what has to click for Ole Miss this season?
Well, the pitching staff last year, Chris, 5.88 ERA, just one of the worst, in the history of Mike Bianco. A lot of things just didn't go right last year. You talk about hitting, you talk about defensive play, and then, of course, the ERA was so high. But I think if you pin me down, Ole Miss historically has been really good on the middle infield. And, last year and maybe the year before last, Mike Bianco and that team was just not as good as it needed to be. I truly believe that if Ole Miss shores up its interior infield, specifically Hill at second base, shortstop, Braden Randall, and plays like they need to play, I think this team not only could make a regional, I think they could possibly host a regional. And I do truly believe that if they can shore up their defense and have a decent – if Hunter Elliott can stay healthy, that gives you such a nice shot to start the SEC season or SEC play of a 3-game schedule or 3-game series 1-0. So it just gives you a really good opportunity. But I do think if you shore up that defense, I think things can be so much better. This is a program that's very proud, Chris, and Swayze Field is a place that grew as Mike Bianco and this baseball program grew back in 2005. They continue to add on and add on. And I think there's been some people say, what's the best and the nicest stadium in the conference? I don't think Swayze Field is it, but I do think it is at the top. And Swayze Field is a place that was built to host regionals. And I think that's exactly what Ole Miss head coach Mike Bianco wants to do. It's a program that was annually hosting regionals, super regionals. Ole Miss needs to get back to that. And I do believe this year they can get back to hosting a regional if those things can happen for Ole Miss.
Going to be a fun season in Oxford, Mississippi, as Ole Miss looks to return to former glory again. Brad Logan, one of the best in the business when it comes to covering all things Rebels, not just baseball, but basketball, football as well, everything in between. For Inside the Rebels on 24/7 Sports, the Believe in Ole Miss podcast, and the Red and Blue Crew podcast. Brad, appreciate you taking the time. Let folks know, just in case they've been living under a rock, where they can find all of your great work.
Yeah, of course, we hang out on Twitter and X. That's kind of the hub at Brad Logan, COTE. And then we're, of course, at Inside the Rebels. That's Rebs247.com. And then anywhere and everywhere that you get your podcast, we invite you to subscribe, rate, and review us at the Believe in Ole Miss podcast and, of course, the Red and Blue Crew podcast that I co-host with David Johnson.
Yeah, Brad, looking forward to getting down to Arlington, getting a firsthand look at Ole Miss this weekend, and excited to get to Oxford as well and hang out with you guys down there and watch the Rebels play.
We'll look forward to it. Thanks, Chris.